Hailie Cushman is a licensed clinical mental health counselor in the state of North Carolina. She lives in Virginia with her husband Nick and their 3 daughters. Hailie has experience in clinical mental health counseling as a crisis counselor working with adults and youth, as well as work history in a public school district as a mental health coordinator. Hailie is here today to discuss the importance of mental wellness. Welcome, Hailie. I'm so happy that you agreed to be on my talk show today to talk about something that is very important to both of us, and that is the stigma that surrounds mental health.
Absolutely. Hi, Christy. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to talking about such an important topic.
So before we actually get into the meat of the subject, can you explain to our viewers what mental health or mental wellness really is?
Absolutely. I think it's really important to talk about, what is mental health, what is mental wellness, and what does that mean? So mental health or mental wellness is a combination of our social, emotional, and psychological well-being. It affects how we think, feel, and behave on a daily basis. And that's why it's so important to be mindful or have intention in having a positive mental health or positive mental wellness. And a lot of times I explain it to people like this. Mental health is the exact same thing as your physical health. If you fall, you break a bone, or you experience, a heart attack or cardiac distress, you're going to go seek help from a medical provider or a specialist. If your family member or a peer or a friend is with you, they're probably going to help you get to that specialist or that doctor to make sure that you're okay. Same thing with mental health and mental wellness. If you start feeling, have periods of sadness, hopelessness, feeling worthless, negative thoughts, or even, intrusive thoughts or over excessive worry for a period of 2 weeks or more, that's your body telling you, my mental wellness is not great right now. That's your red flag. That's your sign to seek help from a doctor or a specialist for your mental health or mental wellness. And my hope is that eventually, as we reduce the stigma of mental health or mental wellness, my hope is that your friend, your colleague, your peer is going to help you seek that specialist and help you seek that doctor when they notice those signs and symptoms in you, just as they would if you had a medical condition.
Well, I'm glad that you explained it in that way, that mental health issues are just like having regular issues with a broken bone. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. We're not ashamed when we go to the doctor when we break a leg or break an arm or go to the eye doctor, but there's such a negative stigma surrounding, going to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist. What can we do to reduce that stigma for the patient and even for their families and friends as well? Because, I've heard people say, well, I don't want to hang around with somebody who's crazy. And, we both know that there's no such term as crazy. It's not in the DSM-5. There's no such diagnosis as crazy, but that's a word hung on people by other people. But what can we do as friends and family to help reduce the negative stigma?
Absolutely. I think it's so important to note that, negative stigma prevents a lot of people from seeking mental health treatment or mental health help. That stigma is still here. As much as we would like to say that it's gone and we want it to be gone, it's still present, and it's still widely present, not just nationally, but globally. And if a person feels like they're going to be judged or looked at in a negative way because of a symptom, a diagnosis, or a behavior, then they're much more reluctant to seek help. They may be afraid to talk to their family or friends because they're afraid of how they will be viewed, to tell them, how they've been struggling emotionally or what mental health challenge that they've been struggling with. So the stigma can prevent treatment. The thing is, if we can reduce the stigma, then those suffering in a mental health challenge will be more likely to reach out. They'll be more likely to go and seek treatment, to see a psychiatrist, to see a therapist, or even just to talk to a loved one. So just as I said before, if someone has a broken bone, they're going to go and seek treatment. They're going to go see that orthopedic. And mental health is the same. I think it's important to note too, we all struggle with mental health challenges. It's just on a spectrum. So one's not better or worse than the other. And I would say if someone told you in their lifetime they've never struggled with a mental health challenge, I would feel confident in saying that that person is a liar, because we have all struggled at some point in time with a mental health challenge or a mental health diagnosis or concern. So the stigma is there. The fear of being labeled is there. And it's important to note, just because we can't physically see it like that broke bone doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. So one way as a community that we can help with reducing that stigma is being that constant, being there for your family member, for your friend, for yourself. When you notice that mental health challenge or you see the symptoms are increasing in someone else or yourself, be that person just to say, hey, are you okay? I've noticed you've been struggling. I want you to know I'm here for you. So just being that person that they can confide in, that they know that you're going to be open. They're not going to come to you and feel judged. And then be that person that, you're going to connect them to the resources, just like you would if they were in a medical challenge or a medical emergency. And then really self-reflect. Self-reflection is huge. Asking yourself, do I view mental health in a different way? Am I judgmental towards myself or others if they have a mental health challenge? So really just a lot of deep self-reflection, educating yourself, and then being there for the people that are struggling with a mental health challenge and being there wholeheartedly. They know you're sincere about it. They know that they can trust you. And that in itself is going to help reduce the stigma of mental health.
Those are some fantastic ideas, Hailie. I think proven ideas that will work if we just put them into action. We have to put them into action. We can have the ideas, but we have to put them into action. You and I had talked a couple of weeks ago about the suicide rate around, with people who struggle with mental health issues. Can you tell me some of the signs of someone who may be thinking about suicide, and what we can do as friends and family of those people who struggle with that, what we can do to help prevent that?
Yes, absolutely. That's another piece. Suicide can be a direct ripple effect of that stigma, of the mental health stigma. If a person is in fear of seeking help, if a person is in fear of, talking to a friend, talking to a loved one because they don't want to be judged or they don't want to be viewed in a negative way, and they keep that mental health challenge or that emotion, locked up inside, and they don't communicate it or seek help, then the symptoms can increase. And ultimately that can lead to suicidal ideation and acting, upon that plan of suicidal ideation. So suicide prevention is huge, but we can't have suicide prevention if we don't reduce the stigma of mental health. So some signs and symptoms of suicide in a loved one is, if your friend or your loved one, or even yourself, again, knowing them in yourself is just as important. Starting to isolate more, showing those withdrawn behaviors, losing interest in things that you used to take pleasure in, talking about death or wanting to die, having easy access to means to act upon that suicidal ideation. Hopelessness can be a sign of feelings of worthlessness can be a sign of suicidal ideation. But Christy, I think it's also important to note, what are some risk factors of suicide? We can see the signs, but it's also important to recognize, risk factors of suicide. And some of those risk factors can be substance abuse or an increase in substance abuse, impulsive or aggressive behaviors, family history of suicide, or a previous attempt of suicide is a huge risk factor. Feeling like you have no reason to live is a risk factor. Talking about being a burden to others, or extreme mood swings or shift in mood is also a risk factor. So recognizing those warning signs and risk factors and looking for them in our loved ones and our peers and our colleagues. I think the thing is with suicide prevention and looking for the warning signs, we don't often wake up in the morning and say, is my husband thinking about killing himself today? That's just not a question that we ask ourselves, So Typically, there are signs of suicide before someone completes suicide. We just are not often thinking about looking for those signs. So being aware of them, looking for those signs, and then also being that trustworthy person that if someone is truly struggling with that mental health challenge, they know that they can come to you in acceptance and in a non-judgmental way and seek help. And so that is really important for, I think, community members to know, for your loved ones to know, to look out for those signs and risk factors.
Those are really fantastic ways to, try to notice if somebody is struggling. There's something I wanted to ask you too. I've heard this all of my life. If somebody's talking about suicide, they're not going to do it. They're just seeking attention. Have you heard that? And can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know that has to be a myth.
Yes, I have heard that quite often, actually. And you're right, Christy, that is absolutely a myth. I have heard that is one of the myths of suicide, and I have heard that often that, if someone tells you they're going to kill themselves, they're not going to kill themselves. I've heard that over and over and over, especially in trainings that I do in mental health trainings in my profession, but that's not true. So a person can say, I'm going to kill myself 100 times, and every time we need to take that statement very seriously. Even if they have no intention in that statement, and this is what I tell people in my trainings, even if we hear that statement from the same person 5-10 times in 1 week, every time we hear that statement, we're going to take it very serious. We're going to do a suicide risk assessment every single time we hear that, because even if there is no intention, that's really a negative coping skill. So if the way you cope with stress or some, negative news is saying, well, I'm just going to kill myself, that's not really a positive coping skill. And it tells me that we need to increase your toolbox on coping strategies instead of using that statement. But then also, if the thought is there, if the thought of killing themselves is there, it's there. So they can make that statement 50 times or make it one time, but one day eventually act on that statement. So yes, that is a myth. And anytime somebody makes that statement to you, I urge you to take it serious every time, because a person's life, suicide is preventable. It's 100% preventable if we can just get the resources out there and the knowledge out there to others to reduce that stigma, to offer help, to know what to do when someone is suicidal and struggling in that mental health challenge. So absolutely, that is a myth.
Hailie, I completely agree with what you just said about that myth. There's also another myth as well, that if you ask someone if they're struggling or having suicidal thoughts or ideations, that you can then deposit that into their mind. Can you talk on that?
Yes, I can. And Christy, that is absolutely another myth. And I've heard that one quite often as well. I often hear, I'm afraid to ask them if they're having thoughts of killing themselves or having thoughts of suicide, because if they're not, I don't want to put that thought into their head. But that's absolutely a myth. If a person's having those thoughts, they're having those thoughts. If they're not, they're going to be quite quick. They're going to be quick to respond to say, no, I'm not thinking like that at all. So in my experience, when I've asked a person, are you having thoughts of killing yourself? Sometimes they answer right away, yes, I am. And this is what it is. This is how I'm feeling. This is what I'm thinking. Sometimes they're really hesitant and they might kind of beat around the bush per se for a while and then open up. But when I ask a person if they're having thoughts of killing themselves or having thoughts of suicide and they're truly not, the answer is pretty quick. And they'll say, no, I'm not. I haven't had those thoughts, but I am feeling like this. So that is a myth. You're not going to create that thought if it's not already there. And a lot of times when we ask people if they're having thoughts of killing themselves or if they're having thoughts of suicide, and they truly are, it's almost like a sigh of relief if a person is. You can almost see the burden. When you finally ask that question, I'll see something like, oh my gosh, like somebody's finally cared enough to ask me, and I can finally talk about it because I've been holding it in for so long. So that is a myth. And I'm glad you bring those two questions up, because it's so important that people understand that that's a myth. And it's important for you to ask those questions to those struggling with suicidal ideation.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because it is so important that people know that they have people around them who do care, who care enough to ask and to allow them to relieve themselves of that burden. So I kind of want to switch gears here. I love the fact that you're passionate about mental health, mental wellness, suicide prevention, but you're also passionate about domestic violence awareness as well. You have a personal story behind that. I'll let you share it if you want to. If you don't want to, you don't have to. And I'm planning to have you back on my show in October during National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. But I'm just so proud of that. And the fact that you're trying to make a difference in both of these areas, both of these fields. I think that mental health issues and domestic violence issues go hand in hand. They're intertwined. Yeah. So if you want to touch on that a little bit, you can.
Absolutely. I am excited for all the work that's being done in mental health and suicide prevention and also domestic violence. So domestic violence is very near and dear to my heart. I've worked in mental health for the last 10 years. And so I worked with, women, men, children in domestic violence situations. So I've always, held some sort of passion about it. But 2.5 years ago, my best friend was murdered by her husband. And I had no clue. And we've seen each other several times a week. My children would ride the bus to her house several afternoons. And I would pick them up after work. Lauren and I had been best friends since before kindergarten. We lived on the same street our entire lives. And so I always just thought that if something was going on, I assumed that she would just tell me, like she did with everything else. And so domestic violence became a large part of my life 2.5 years ago when she passed away from domestic violence at the hands of her husband. And I guess I was so shook by that because I had worked with other women, men, and family in that same situation. I felt like I would know what to look for, what to see. But when you're that close to the situation, you don't necessarily see the red flags, or they don't appear to you as red flags like it would someone that's not so close to you, someone that's not like your sister, your family, your friends. So I am very passionate about domestic violence and raising awareness of domestic violence. We're doing a couple of events in our local community to raise awareness for domestic violence. And, just to remember those women, not just the women who, not just the women that have passed away from domestic violence, but also the women that have lived through domestic violence, who we want to honor them. We want to raise awareness that, leaving can be done for women and men and children. It can happen. It doesn't have to end in the tragedy that Lauren's story ended. And so I think raising that awareness, but like you said, Christy, it goes hand in hand with mental illness. It goes hand in hand with that mental wellness, even for the person being abused. Focusing on your mental wellness. Am I mentally well? Is a good question to ask yourself every day in any situation, for a mental health challenge and a domestic violence situation, just for your typical day to start your work day, to be with your family, to be with your friends. Am I feeling mentally well today? And if I'm not, what can I do to increase that mental wellness to help me to feel better? So yes, those things are so important to me. And I am looking forward to coming back in October to talk about domestic violence and ways to raise awareness for that as well.
Well, I just want to say that I am really sorry for the loss of Lauren. I know how close you guys were. I follow you on social media and I see the posts and stuff, and it was very heartbreaking what happened to her, and my heart broke for you and for your mom and all of her friends and for her children as well. And I just wanted to also tell you I'm so proud of you for the work that you're doing in both fields, and I have truly enjoyed having you as a guest today talking about this, because these are really important topics to me, to you, and to a lot of people. A lot of people, I think, that probably wouldn't otherwise admit it. So I hope that we have touched some people today, and people can get a better understanding about both the issues. And I just want to say thank you for being on my show today.
Thank you so much, Christy. I'm so grateful for being here and just one last take home note, with mental health, mental wellness, suicide prevention, domestic violence, educate yourself. Don't be afraid to talk about it to others. Be open and available, be willing to help. And that's how we're going to reduce that stigma, is knowing what it is, knowing what it feels like, and being able to help others and getting it out in the open, talking about it. So thank you so much, Christy, and I look forward to coming back in October.
If you or anyone you know is struggling or exhibiting signs of suicide, help is available by calling the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255 or by visiting suicideprevention.org. Hailie, are there any resources local to Virginia or local to you in Virginia that you want to mention that people can maybe use to try to get help?
I think there's one more resource, but it's also national, is a crisis text line. A lot of times people don't want to call to, talk to somebody, but there's now a crisis text line. So you can text a volunteer crisis counselor at 741-741.
Okay.
And a trained crisis counselor will text you back and help you work through that crisis.
Good. I'm glad there's help available. I also wanted to mention this too. If you or anyone you know is in a relationship where there's domestic violence, or you might suspect that a loved one is in a domestic violence relationship, help is also available by calling the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233 or by visiting the website www.thehotline.org. Thank you all for watching today. Please share this show with your friends and family so that we can bring awareness to both of these issues. They are both very important, and maybe we can do even a little bit to help prevent domestic violence and suicide, and to help people who are struggling with mental health issues so they can have mental wellness.